Parents, what is the worst thing you have ever told your child? I told my first son that I have two sons and he's not either of them. When I was 20, I got my girlfriend at the time pregnant. I was scared but I manned up and married her. It was hard but we made it work for 8 years until I caught her cheating. I ended the marriage, and began co-parenting my, at the time, son. He was my world. My dad wasn't there for me at all, so I swore to myself I would be the best father I could. I had my then son every weekend. I was always on time and ready to go. Even though I worked full-time and was going to school, I made sure he always had my full attention when he was with me. He was my best friend and my son. Even though money was tight, we had some amazing adventures. He loved spending time with my family, and even had friends in my neighborhood. I thought we were doing well, until he was around 11. At that point he started to not want to visit me. His mother had a new boyfriend who was well off. I knew he was taking them on trips and doing fun activities on the weekends, so, at first, I didn't make a stink. But about 6 months after they started dating, my son was seeing me maybe one weekend a month. After about 9 months he stopped coming altogether. After 3 months of calling, chasing, and begging, I was getting nowhere. So my family came together and hired a lawyer to sue my ex for parental alienation. I lost, and was ordered to pay more child support. As I was leaving the courtroom, my ex's lawyer approached me and offered to cancel child support if I gave up my paternal rights. I flat refused until the lawyer said this was both my ex-wife's and my then son's wishes. I asked to speak to my son alone and they agreed as long as both lawyers were in the room. I spoke to my son and asked him if he really wanted me to give up my rights, and he said yeah. I explained that it would mean I wouldn't be his dad and he couldn't come visit me or my family anymore. He looked me dead in the eyes, like he was asking the time, and said, "Yeah, so?" I was shattered. I asked again, if he really understood what he was saying, and he said yes, he wanted to be my ex's boyfriend's son. I signed the papers that day. From that day until 2 days ago he never spoke or contacted me, or any of my family. It literally almost killed me. I started to drink, and stayed drunk for weeks. Finally, one day, I drank until I passed out and aspirated my own vomit. I would be dead now except the mailman dropped a package addressed to me to my neighbor's house and she saw me convulsing through my window, and called 911. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital with aspiration pneumonia. After that I moved back to my hometown, got a new job, hit the gym, and spent 4 years in intense psychotherapy. I was finally able to let it all go, and move on with my life. About 6 years after my move, I met my now wife, and she had an 11-year-old son. I was standoffish with him at first, but that kid was so amazing that I couldn't help but fall in love with him. The day he turned 18, he asked me to adopt him. It was the proudest day of my life. He and his mother turned my life around and gave me a reason for living. Now not only do I have my wonderful adopted son who is currently serving in the Marines, but I also have a 4-year-old son and 18-month-old daughter. My career has also taken off, and I'm doing very well for myself and my family. I went from a man no one could love, to a successful father of 3 with a beautiful wife and family. I survived. Then about 3 weeks ago I got a call at my office. It was my ex-sister-in-law. She informed me that my ex had passed. I simply said, okay, and hung up. It's been 14 years since I've had any contact with any of those people, and I have no desire to know anything about them now. Soon after, my family and I were getting ready to go to a picnic when there was a knock on the door. I recognized him through the front glass. It was my first biological offspring. I opened the door and he said, "Hey Dad, it's your son." Without an ounce of hesitation I said, "No you're not. I have 2 sons and you're not either one of them. Now please leave my property." He just stood there kind of dumbfounded as I shut the door. After a moment he left. I then put out a text to my family, letting them know that he was lurking around, and I have no intention of having any contact with him. I then told them I will cut anyone who does contact him out of my life completely. It's been 14 years. I don't owe him or his family anything. I had to listen to my mother cry for him on her deathbed over that child. I laid in a hospital bed with a machine breathing for me, wishing it would turn off and let me die because of that child. I learned in therapy that he had the right to make his own choices, but that I also have the right to make mine. My choice was to move on without him as part of my family, as he wanted. He has no right to come back into my life and disturb me or my family now. My entire family agrees with me. Even my wife and my in-laws agree that nothing good can come of this. He's 26 years old now. Now that his mother is dead, all of a sudden I'm up to bat? I don't care if he was 12 or 200, he made the call, and if you had seen the look in his eyes when he said yeah, so? You would have known like I did that he didn't give a damn about me. So I had to stop giving a damn about him to survive. He doesn't have the right to ambush me on my front porch and act like he's anything to me now. Well, come to find out my sister is the one who has been giving him and my ex-sister-in-law my contact info. My sister is inconsolable that I won't give him a chance. Apparently he called her after he came to my house and broke down. I told her to stop right there, I don't care, but now she's begging me, for our mother's sake, to meet with this kid. So I ask you, is there anything good that can come out of a meeting with this kid now?
Next story.
My little brother confessed his secret to me. Now I have to get him away from my parents. I noticed a shift in my brother's personality at the start of this year and didn't think much of it. He's 16 and I'm 25, and I live fully on my own. One day, our parents asked me to start spending extra time with him, taking him on hikes and to play basketball and so on. No big deal. We're not super close but do hang out occasionally. Then they started asking me to comment on girls in front of him, which seemed weird, so I didn't do it. Once, when we were hanging out, I noticed he didn't have his phone, so I asked him if he forgot it. He told me he was being punished and not allowed to use it unless one of my parents watches him. I asked if he got caught looking at adult films on it or something, but he really just wanted me to drop it, so I did. Later, when I asked our parents about it, they told me that he and his best friend had gotten caught with pills, which is why he was not allowed to see him anymore. I had already started feeling weird about how under lock and key my brother seemed and honestly didn't know if I should believe them or not. I had offered him Mary Jane before and he said no, so it just didn't seem like something he'd do. So I went to the Starbucks his best friend works at to see what he said or to see if I needed to kick his butt over it. When I got there, he told me a very different story. He told me that my brother was his boyfriend and that our parents caught them kissing and flipped out. Afterwards, they tossed him out and made sure they couldn't see each other or even talk to each other. He told me that he had been worried and was trying anything he could to contact my brother, but he hadn't heard anything back. I was skeptical, but he showed me some messages and pictures that confirmed they were indeed a couple. I thanked him for telling me and told him I'd do what I can to help him and my brother. After that, I was trying to figure out the best way to help my brother. I didn't want to do any more damage to him than what they had done, so I was nervous about saying something since he hadn't come out to me. I also really wanted to flip off on my parents, but I knew that at the moment, that was not the best option. At that point, I was the only person they let him go out alone with. So if I went off on them or told them I knew, they would most likely cut me out, completely isolating him, which was not a good idea given how depressed he'd been. I decided to go find his boyfriend at Starbucks again a couple days after. When I found him, I was able to have him write a note for my brother. I figured it would be best to have something to lead into the conversation. Additionally, I wanted him to write his number down in case my brother didn't know it off the top of his head and wanted to text him from my phone. After that, I picked my brother up like normal and fought the urge to go off on my mom. I've never had the best relationship with my parents, but I can honestly say I hated them now. The game plan was supposed to be going for a hike, but on that day I told him let's get food instead. I figured he might get emotional and I honestly didn't want him near cliffs or hiking emotionally exhausted. I then told him I had seen his friend. I explained how he gave me a letter to give to him, that it was in the glove box with my phone so he could text him if he wanted. I thought he was going to rip the door off the glove box when he opened it. He read the letter and started crying so bad that I pulled over. He didn't understand why I would help him. Apparently our awful parents had him convinced that I would beat the crap out of him if I knew. I thought he'd call or text his boyfriend right away, but he spent at least an hour sobbing. I just kept reassuring him that nothing was wrong with him, that he's not broken or damaged or something that can or needs to be fixed. I felt like a broken record, but I think it helped, or at least I hope it did. After he calmed down, I was able to talk to him for the rest of the drive, dinner, and even most of the night. I told our parents he'd crash at my place cause it got late when we grabbed food, and said that we got talking to two girls, which admittedly led to no fight or questions. He then told me they hadn't physically hurt him, but when they found out, they trashed his room searching for anything gay. This meant anything rainbow or not masculine enough, and they destroyed anything found, including a couple printed pictures he had with his boyfriend. They also deleted all the pictures off his phone and blocked his boyfriend on it. Anytime he used a laptop or phone, they would sit right next to him like vultures. The rest of the time they kept the devices locked up from him. He told me they searched his room once a week just in case he found a way to sneak something in. The rest of the time they either didn't talk to him or berated him and yelled at him about how he needed to be cured and fixed. He cried a lot throughout talking about all of this stuff, including me asking the tough question that he didn't want to answer. I asked about how depressed he had been. If he's been self-harming or contemplating self-slaughter. I'll admit, I cried when he answered. He had been self-harming and thought about unaliving himself even while on our hikes. I made him promise me that he won't self-harm and that if he thinks about doing it, to lie however he has to and call me. I told him if anything happens to him because of my parents, I would unalive them. We talked about options and what could be done. I agreed to help him meet up with his boyfriend whenever possible and get him out of that house as often as possible. He did end up calling his boyfriend between us talking, which made him cry more but smile too. I promised him I'd do anything I could to get him out of that house permanently, whether it was an emancipation fight for custody or whatever. He hugged me more that day and night than I think I've ever hugged anyone. It's embarrassing to admit, but he even slept in my bed. He was able to see his boyfriend the next day before I had to bring him back home, which freaking killed me inside. Luckily, I was able to get my brother out on another occasion soon after. I had planned to go camping with my best friend and was able to take my brother and his boyfriend with us. It was really nice to see them together and so happy. Soon after, I went over to go help him with a project. I discussed some ideas with him and told him that if I could pull one off, I might be able to give him a spot to hide a phone, cause I really wanted him to have one for an emergency. Thankfully, I was able to make it work and got him a phone to keep stashed to contact me and his boyfriend. After that, I immediately got to working with an attorney. He got to work soon after. It took some time, and after some chaos my brother is now living with me. It's not a done deal by any means. We have a court date in a month, but at least till then he can live with me. My attorney has been fantastic and fast with helping me get things done. We're working on emancipation or me becoming his legal guardian until he's 18. Now that my brother is with me, he is feeling great, but I'm still gonna make sure he starts seeing a therapist since it will help with the legal stuff if he is. I'm beyond relieved. It was killing a part of me knowing he was in that situation. We were able to get a temporary no contact order against our parents so we don't have to deal with them till court. I'm hoping everything plays out right so that we could eventually cut them off permanently.
Next story.
My father blamed my sister for my mother's death and neglected her for it. Now he's upset that she calls me dad. I am the older brother to my 5-year-old little sister, Belle, and have always been the one to take care of her. For some background, my parents had me as teenagers when they were 15 and 16. Even as a kid, I could always feel that they regretted having me. After I was born, both my mother and father were practically disowned by their family. My mother had to drop out of high school to take care of me while my father worked 2 jobs just to provide, and even then they couldn't afford a home. So, they lived with my mother's older sister until I was 9, and my father got his GED and managed to get a better job and move us out. Despite our living situation being better, it was clear to me that they believed their lives were ruined because of me. Whenever I misbehaved like any normal child, they'd use the fact that they gave up their lives for me, and I still had the audacity to behave like this. Even when I didn't misbehave, they never treated me with much love. I barely got to get new clothing. They'd get my clothes from Goodwill and practically refused to get me anything nice unless they had to for events like birthdays, parties, meeting friends, and their wedding. My birthdays were always celebrated with the bare minimum. They'd get me a cupcake and a single gift, which was never anything I wanted. Despite everything, I was still a child who just wanted their love. However, as I grew older, I began to accept I wouldn't get it and made peace with that. I guess somewhere along the line my parents realized I gave up on them and tried to treat me better through my teen years. But, at that point I wasn't the child who begged for their love anymore. I never received the love of my parents, and I wasn't asking for it anymore. Although I can't say I kept hating them, in my eyes we were practically strangers. I never got to know them truly, as they raised me with the bare minimum, never had any real conversations with me, and never spent any quality time with me. They also knew nothing about me, so them suddenly trying to play parents with me was awkward to say the least. When I was 18, my mother got pregnant. I guess that was when they gave up on trying to fix things with me, as they could have a new child to start over with. They didn't treat me poorly again, but it felt like we were strangers living in the same home. When I turned 19, my mother gave birth to a girl, but due to some complications she didn't end up surviving. This crushed my father. He began to resent me for not being as sad as he was over her death, despite the fact that she was barely a mother to me. He also blamed his daughter for killing his wife. He was never home after the incident, and I was left taking care of my sister. I ended up having to take a break from college after the time I came home from my classes to my sister screaming with hunger in an unchanged diaper while my father was out drinking. I took care of Belle full time and tried calling out my father multiple times, but he always got angry. He would always end the conversation with him saying I could always leave Belle at the fire station if I wanted. I eventually gave up on forcing him to be a father. Despite everything, I truly loved Belle. She was the sweetest and cutest kid. She was almost always smiley and surprisingly slept through the night. Once she was old enough, I enrolled her in daycare and continued my education while working night shifts. I always made sure to leave a good portion of afternoons empty so I could spend time with her. She always knew who her actual father was, and as she grew older she began to try and spend time with him. She would follow him around the house, but of course that quickly ended after he blew up on her and she began to fear him. Soon after, I realized she saw me as a parental figure despite knowing I was her brother. When she was old enough for preschool, I found out she was telling people I was her father. I never mentioned it to her and just let it be until she gave her Father's Day card she made in preschool to me. I then told her that if she wanted, she could call me Dad, and since then she's been calling me Daddy. Then my father got a girlfriend. He began to change himself as he stopped drinking, got a better job, and even began to take over a majority of the bills other than the portion I agreed to pay. He never really tried being a father to Belle, but he did begin to eat breakfast with us. Regardless of any changes, that breakfast was spent in silence other than me and Belle talking. Fast forward to a few months ago on Belle's birthday. I had planned a party for her and invited her preschool class. My father ended up attending. I guess his girlfriend thought it would be a good time to meet his daughter, as she was the only one who looked excited to be there. Anyways, while she was opening gifts I surprised her with one of those kids' electric cars. She screamed and hugged me, yelling how she loved me and called me Daddy. After the party and after Belle was fast asleep, my father asked me what the hell happened. I was confused until he yelled asking why his daughter was calling me Daddy. I asked him if he seriously didn't know why. That's when I told him that I was the one who raised her, I bought her everything, I celebrated her firsts, and I was the one who didn't abandon her. He was quiet and went to bed. Since then he's tried to play father and talk to her, but he was a stranger to her. She is a sweet girl, so she entertained my father's conversation, but he could tell how awkward she felt and it was clear it hurt him. Despite how selfish it is, I don't want their relationship to get better. After all, just as she saw me as her dad, I saw her as my daughter. I graduated college and I'm looking for a better job so I can move Belle and I into our own home. I may be a bad person for enjoying my father's misery and regret, but I'll never be as bad as him.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.